The news spread through Kepler's Rest like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every alien on the station knew about the tiny Earth creature that had killed the Fangbeast. Jake found himself at the center of attention wherever he went. But this time the stares were different. Instead of mockery, he saw amazement, confusion, and something that might have been respect. Felix seemed completely unaware of his new fame. The small orange cat went about his usual business of exploring, napping, and investigating interesting smells. He accepted the attention with the same calm dignity he had always shown, as if killing legendary space monsters was just another part of his daily routine. The first major change came at breakfast the next morning. Jake entered the cantina with Felix trotting beside him and found that the entire room had gone quiet. Hundreds of alien eyes followed their progress to an empty table. Jake sat down and placed his food tray on the surface. Felix jumped up and settled beside the tray, as he had done every morning since their arrival. A Korvaxi merchant approached their table cautiously. This was one of the same aliens who had been joking about stepping on Felix just days before. Now the merchant's many eyes were fixed on the cat with something approaching awe. "Captain Morrison," the Korvaxi clicked nervously. May I touch the small hunter?" Jake looked at Felix, who was calmly washing his paw. "You can ask him yourself." The merchant extended one claw toward Felix very slowly. The cat looked up, studied the Korvaxi for a moment, then rubbed his head against the offered claw. The merchant's shell seemed to shimmer with excitement. "The small hunter honors me," the Korvaxi whispered. More aliens began to approach the table. Zephyrians coiled nearby, hoping for a chance to see Felix up close. Even a group of young Vraxian warriors gathered at a respectful distance, their black eyes wide with curiosity. Commander Hextar entered the cantina and walked straight to Jake's table. The massive warrior looked down at Felix, who was now grooming his tail with complete indifference to all the attention. "Human," Hextar said, his voice much quieter than usual. "I owe you an apology." Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "Excuse me?" "I called your companion weak. I said your species lacked understanding of true predators." Hextar's armor plates shifted as he moved closer. "I was wrong." Felix looked up at the 9-foot-tall warrior and meowed once. It was a small, conversational sound, as if he was politely acknowledging the apology. "How did he know where to find the beast?" Hextar asked. Jake scratched Felix behind the ears. "Cats are natural hunters. They understand how prey animals think and move. Felix tracked the Fangbeast by following its scent trail backward to its hiding place. But the sensors could not locate it. Electronic sensors look for specific things," Jake explained. "Heat signatures, movement patterns, electromagnetic fields. Felix uses his nose, his ears, and instincts that have been developed over millions of years of evolution." Hextar studied Felix with new interest. "Your small hunter is a living sensor array." "Better than any sensor array," Jake replied. "He can adapt to new situations and make decisions based on incomplete information." Trade Minister Velnara approached the table with several other Altarian officials. Her usual composed expression had been replaced by obvious curiosity. "Captain Morrison," she said, "the Altarian Council would like to discuss a new trade agreement with Earth. We are particularly interested in learning more about human-animal partnerships." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Yesterday you questioned my judgment for bringing Felix to business meetings." Velnara's pale cheeks showed a hint of blue, which Jake recognized as an Altarian expression of embarrassment. "Yesterday we did not understand the tactical advantages of such partnerships. Today we see the wisdom in your approach. Felix jumped down from the table and began exploring the cantina. Everywhere he went, aliens moved aside to give him room. Some offered him small treats, though Felix politely ignored most of them. He was more interested in investigating the various scents and sounds of the different species. A group of Zephyrian merchants slithered over to Jake's table. Their leader, the same female who had offered to care for Felix earlier, spoke in a much more respectful tone. "Captain Morrison," she said, "we wish to apologize for our earlier comments. We did not understand the small hunter's true nature." "What did you see when you looked at him before?" Jake asked. The Zephyrian's scales rippled thoughtfully. "A weak critter that would become prey to harsh space conditions. Now we see a predator that chooses its battles whistly." Jake nodded. "Felix has always been the same cat. The only thing that changed was your perspective." Station Commander Yixali entered the cantina and walked directly to Jake's table. The tall Altarian looked tired but relieved. The Fangbeast. Crisis had been resolved without further casualties, and the station was returning to normal operations. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "The Galactic Safety Council wants to study your companions' abilities. They believe that human-animal partnerships could revolutionize deep space security protocols." Jake looked around the cantina at all the alien faces watching their conversation. "What kind of study?" "Non-invasive observation. They want to understand how Felix detected and tracked the Fangbeast when our most advanced sensors failed. The information could save thousands of lives on frontier stations like this one." Felix had wandered back to the table and jumped onto Jake's lap. The cat settled down and began purring, content to be petted while the adults discussed important matters. "Felix isn't a research subject," Jake said firmly. "He's my partner." "Of course," Yixali replied quickly. "The Council understands that. They want to learn from both of you as a team." Jake considered the offer. It would mean extended stays on various stations and ships, demonstrating techniques that most humans took for granted. But it would also help establish Earth's reputation in the galactic community. "We'll consider it," Jake said finally. Over the next few days, Jake found himself fielding similar offers from dozens of alien organizations. Military forces wanted to learn about animal-assisted reconnaissance. Trading companies were interested in using Earth creatures for cargo inspection. Even diplomatic services asked about animals that could detect emotional states or hostile intentions. Chief Mortok approached Jake in one of the station's observation lounges. The scarred Vraxian warrior had been unusually quiet since the Fangbeast incident. "Human," Mortok said, "may I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "How did you know to trust the small hunter's instincts over our technology?" Jake looked out at the stars through the lounge's large windows. Felix was sitting on the windowsill watching ships arrive and depart from the station's docking bays. "Experience," Jake said. "Felix has been with me for 3 years. In that time, he's never been wrong about danger. His instincts are more reliable than any machine I've ever used. But he is so small. How does he survive in dangerous situations?" Jake smiled. "Size isn't everything, Chief. Felix doesn't survive by being big or strong. He survives by being smart, careful, and decisive. When he acts, it's because he's already thought through all the options." Mortok studied Felix with new appreciation. We Vraxians value size and strength above all else. Perhaps we have been missing something important. Every species has its own advantages, Jake replied. The trick is learning to work together instead of assuming one approach is always best. On their last day at Kepler's Rest, Jake packed his equipment while Felix supervised from the bed. The cat had spent the morning exploring their quarters one final time, as if making sure they hadn't forgotten anything important. Commander Hextar arrived with a small package wrapped in Vraxian ceremonial cloth. "A gift for the small hunter," he announced. Jake unwrapped the package to reveal a collar made of flexible metal mesh. It was beautiful work, crafted with the precision that Vraxian artisans were famous for. The collar was sized perfectly for Felix and included a small communication device. "It will allow him to contact your ship directly if you are separated," Hextar explained. "It is also resistant to most toxins and energy weapons." Felix approached cautiously and sniffed the collar. After a moment of consideration, he allowed Jake to put it on. The metal mesh adjusted automatically to fit comfortably around the cat's neck. "Thank you," Jake said. "This is incredibly generous." "It is a small payment for the lesson the small hunter taught us," Hextar replied. "Strength comes in many forms." Trade Minister Velnara arrived with her own gift, a data pad containing trade agreements and cultural exchange programs between Earth and the Alterian Confederation. "These agreements are more favorable than any we have offered to new species," she said. "Earth has proven that it understands partnership in ways we did not expect." As Jake and Felix prepared to leave the station, they were escorted by an honor guard of aliens from multiple species. The same beings who had mocked Felix a week earlier now treated him like a visiting dignitary. At the docking bay, Jake turned for one last look at Kepler's Rest. The massive station continued its slow rotation against the stars, home to thousands of different life forms from across the galaxy. "They learned something important," Jake told Felix as they boarded the Horizon's edge. "And so did we." Felix meowed in agreement and settled into. The hunting parties failed one by one. Jake watched the reports come in from the command center's emergency monitors, each one worse than the last. The Fangbeast was proving too clever, too fast, and too deadly for the alien security forces. The first major failure came from Chief Mortok's elite squad. 8 of the most experienced Vraxian warriors, armed with the best weapons the station had to offer, cornered the beast in a cargo bay on level 6. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. "Beast used the overhead crane system," Mortok reported, his voice tight with pain. "He was one of only 2 survivors. Dropped on us from above. My warriors never had a chance to use their superior size." Jake stood beside Felix in the command center, watching the tactical display. The cat had been unusually quiet for the past hour. His green eyes focused on the screens showing the station's layout. Sometimes Felix would tilt his head, as if he was working out a puzzle that no one else could see. Commander Hextar paced back and forth, his heavy footsteps echoing in the tension-filled room. "The beast cannot be everywhere at once," he growled. "We will overwhelm it with numbers." "That didn't work for the first 3 teams," Jake pointed out quietly. Hextar spun around to face him. "Human, your species' weakness is showing. True warriors do not give up after initial setbacks." But Jake was watching the pattern of attacks on the display. The Fangbeast wasn't moving randomly through the station. It was following specific routes, using the ventilation system and maintenance tunnels like a highway. Most importantly, it seemed to be heading toward the station's core. Felix suddenly stood up and walked to Jake's side. The cat looked up at him with those bright green eyes, then glanced toward the door. Jake recognized that look. Felix wanted to go somewhere, and he wanted to go now. "Commander Yix Ali," Jake said, "permission to return to my quarters. I think Felix needs to rest." The station commander looked relieved. "Granted. Take 2 security guards with you." Jake nodded, but he had no intention of going to his quarters. As soon as they were out of the command center, he gave the security guards the slip. Felix led him through a series of maintenance corridors that seemed to be deserted. The cat moved with absolute confidence, as if he had memorized every passage in the station. They descended through several levels, past areas that Jake had never seen before. The corridors here were narrower and older, part of the station's original construction. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the metal walls. Felix stopped at an access hatch that was barely large enough for a human to crawl through. The cat looked at Jake and meowed softly. "You want to go in there?" Jake asked. Felix pawed at the hatch's lock mechanism. Jake hesitated. The passages beyond were too small for the station's security forces to follow. If the Fangbeast was using these routes, Jake and Felix would be completely on their own. But Felix seemed certain about the direction. Jake had learned to trust his cat's instincts over the years. Felix had never led him into danger without good reason. Jake opened the hatch and crawled inside. Felix darted ahead, moving through the narrow passage with feline grace. Behind them, Jake could hear the distant sounds of more hunting parties organizing. The aliens were still trying to solve their problem with force and numbers. The passage opened into a larger maintenance area filled with pipes and environmental controls. Felix immediately went to work, sniffing along the base of the walls and investigating every corner. His behavior was different now. Instead of the casual exploration Jake was used to, Felix moved with intense purpose. The cat found what he was looking for near a large air circulation unit. Felix's body went rigid, and his fur stood up along his spine. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jake looked where Felix was staring but saw nothing unusual. Just another maintenance hatch leading deeper into the station's infrastructure. But Felix's reaction told him everything he needed to know. "It's been here recently," Jake whispered. Felix's nose twitched as he processed scents that human senses couldn't detect. The cat followed an invisible trail along the wall, his movements careful and silent. Jake recognized this behavior. Felix was hunting. They climbed through more passages, always heading toward the station's center. Jake realized that Felix was tracking the Fangbeast's scent trail backward, following the path the creature had taken to reach the upper levels. It was like reading a map that only Felix could see. After an hour of crawling through maintenance tunnels, they emerged in a vast chamber that Jake had never known existed. The room was enormous, filled with massive machines that hummed with power. This was the station's primary life support system, the mechanical heart that kept thousands of aliens alive in the vacuum of space. Felix froze at the entrance to the chamber. Every muscle in his small body was tense, and his eyes were fixed on something in the shadows between the machines. Jake followed Felix's gaze and felt his blood turn cold. There, curled up near the atmospheric processors, was the Fangbeast. The creature was even more terrifying than Jake had imagined. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall at the shoulder and built like a nightmare made of muscle and claws. Its hide was dark gray, almost black, with patches that seemed to absorb light. The beast's claws were extended, each one longer than Jake's, forearm, and sharp enough to cut through steel. But the Fangbeast was sleeping. Jake held his breath, afraid to make any sound that might wake the creature. The beast had found the perfect hiding place. The constant hum of the life support machinery would mask its presence from the station's sensors, and the warm air from the processors made it comfortable. Felix moved with incredible stealth, placing each paw carefully on the metal floor. Jake watched in amazement as his 8-pound cat began to stalk an 800-pound monster. Felix's hunting instincts were in full control now, transforming the house cat into something ancient and deadly. The cat circled wide around the sleeping beast, staying in the shadows and using the machinery for cover. Jake could barely see him as Felix moved from hiding spot to hiding spot, getting closer to the Fangbeast with each careful step. Jake realized what Felix was planning. The cat had identified the exact spot where the beast's natural armor was, thinnest right at the base of the neck where the major blood vessels ran close to the surface. It was the same targeting instinct that made cats such efficient hunters of smaller prey, scaled up to face an opponent 100 times larger. Felix reached his final position behind the sleeping Fangbeast. The cat's body was coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Jake held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether they lived or died. The attack happened so fast that Jake almost missed it. Felix leaped onto the Fangbeast's neck with perfect accuracy, his claws and teeth finding the vulnerable spot with surgical precision. The cat's strike was deep and decisive, severing the major artery exactly where it would do the most damage. The Fangbeast woke with a roar that shook the entire chamber. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge Felix from its neck, but the cat held on with grim determination. Blood, dark and toxic, sprayed across the machinery as the beast's own life force became its enemy. Jake pressed himself against the wall, watching in amazement as Felix rode the dying monster like a rodeo performer. The Fangbeast's movements became weaker and more unsteady as blood loss took its toll. The creature that had terrorized an entire space station was being defeated by a house cat from Earth. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 2 minutes, the Fangbeast collapsed. Its massive body hit the metal floor with a sound like thunder, then lay still. Felix jumped down from the creature's neck and began grooming himself, as if he had just caught a particularly large mouse. Jake stared at the scene in disbelief. The legendary predator that had killed dozens of trained alien warriors was dead, brought down by 8 pounds of orange fur and determination. Felix finished cleaning his paws and walked over to Jake. The cat rubbed against his legs and purred, seeking the affection and praise that he knew he had earned. "Good boy," Jake whispered, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "Very good boy." Jake activated his communicator to contact the station's command center. The response was immediate. "Captain Morrison," Commander Yixali's voice crackled through the device. "Where are you? Security reports lost contact with your escort." "I'm in the primary life support chamber," Jake replied. "Level 12, Section 7. That area is restricted. Return to secured quarters immediately." Jake looked at Felix, who was sitting beside the Fangbeast's corpse and washing his face with his paw. "Commander, you need to send a recovery team down here." "Recovery team? Captain, what are you talking about?" Jake took a deep breath. "The Fangbeast is dead." Silence filled the communication channel for several long seconds. "Repeat that, Captain," Yixali said carefully. "The Catherian Fangbeast is dead," Jake said again. "Felix killed it." More silence. Then Commander Hextar's voice boomed through the communicator. "Human, this is no time for jokes. The beast killed 8 of my best warriors." Jake looked at the massive corpse, then at his small cat, who had moved on to grooming his tail. "I'm not joking, Commander. Felix tracked it to its hiding place and killed it while it slept." The alien voices on the communicator became agitated, speaking over each other in several different languages. Jake caught words like impossible and delusional. Everything changed on the fourth day when the distress signal arrived. Jake was in the cantina with Felix when the station's emergency alarms began to wail. Red lights flashed throughout the massive corridors, and automated voices announced in dozens of alien languages that all personnel should report to emergency stations. Jake picked up Felix and hurried toward the command center. Other beings rushed through the corridors, their faces showing concern and fear. Jake had seen many emergencies in space, but the panic in the air felt different this time. The command center was chaos. Alien officers shouted orders while screens displayed incoming data. Station Commander Yixali stood in the center of the room, her tall, Alterian frame rigid with tension. Her silver hair seemed to glow under the emergency lights. "What's the situation?" Jake asked Lisa, who had arrived ahead of him. "Mining ship came in on emergency power," she replied. "The copper strike. Half the crew is dead." On the main screen, Jake could see the mining vessel limping toward the station. The ship's hull was scarred and dented, with several sections showing signs of massive damage. Whatever had attacked it was powerful enough to tear through reinforced mining equipment. Commander. Yixali noticed Jake's arrival. "Captain Morrison, we may need your ship for evacuation. The copper strike brought something back from the asteroid fields." "What kind of something?" Jake asked. Before anyone could answer, the mining ship's captain appeared on the communication screen. He was a Korvaxi, but his usually confident shell was cracked and damaged. His many eyes were wide with terror. "Commander Yixali," the mining captain clicked rapidly. "We found it in the deep asteroids. Dormant, we thought. We were wrong. It killed 12 of my crew before we could contain it." "What species?" Yixali demanded. "Cytherian Fangbeast," the captain replied. The command center fell silent. Jake felt Felix tense in his arms, though the cat remained quiet. Even Jake, who was not familiar with all the galaxy's dangerous creatures, had heard of Fangbeasts. They were legendary predators, feared throughout known space. "Impossible!" Commander Hextar's voice boomed as he entered the command center. "Fangbeasts have been extinct for centuries." The mining captain's image shook his head frantically. "This one was in deep hibernation, preserved in a radiation pocket. When we brought it aboard, the ship's heat woke it up." "Commander, it's worse than the old stories? This one has been exposed to dark matter radiation. It's stronger, faster, and more aggressive than normal." Yixali turned to her security chief, a massive Vraxian with scars across his armored carapace. "Chief Mortok, prepare containment protocols. Seal the mining ship in Docking Bay 7. "Commander," the mining captain interrupted, "the containment won't hold. The beast escaped our cargo hold just before we docked. It may already be loose on the station." Panic rippled through the command center. Jake had read about Fangbeasts in his xenobiology studies. They were 7 feet tall at the shoulder, weighed nearly 800 pounds, and had claws that could slice through ship hulls. Worse, their hide secreted a paralytic toxin that could drop most known species within minutes. Felix squirmed in Jake's arms. The cat wanted down, so Jake set him on the floor. Felix immediately began sniffing the air, his whiskers twitching as he processed dozens of scents that humans couldn't detect. "Lock down the station," Yixali ordered. "No one travels alone. Security teams of 6 minimum, armed with plasma rifles and neural disruptors." Chief Mortok saluted and began organizing his forces. Jake watched the organized chaos with professional interest. The aliens were taking this threat seriously, which meant the Fangbeast was as dangerous as the stories claimed. "Captain Morrison," Yixali said, "I recommend you keep your crew in secured quarters until this situation is resolved." Jake nodded, but he noticed that several alien officers were looking at Felix with even more disgust than usual. Commander Hextar stepped forward, his dark eyes fixed on the small cat. "Commander," Hextar said, with respect, allowing the human to bring his pet was already questionable. Now we face a predator that hunts by scent and sound. This tiny creature will be nothing but bait for the beast. Other voices joined in agreement. Jake heard mutters about liability and unnecessary risk. Trade Minister Velnara, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Perhaps Commander Hextar is correct. Captain Morrison, your attachment to this animal has become a security concern. For everyone's safety, the creature should be contained separately." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "Felix stays with me. He's been through dangerous situations before." "Not like this," Hextar growled. "Human, your soft species does not understand true predators. You coddle weak creatures and call it strength. The Fangbeast will smell this pet from across the station." Felix, who had been exploring the command center, suddenly froze. His body went completely still, and his ears turned toward one of the air vents high on the wall. Jake had seen this behavior before. Felix had detected something that no one else noticed. The cat's pupils dilated to black circles, and his tail puffed up to twice its normal size. A low growl rumbled in his throat, so quiet that only Jake could hear it. "Felix," Jake said softly, "what is it?" But before anyone could react, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in red light. In those seconds of darkness, Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was a roar, deep and savage, echoing through the station's corridors from somewhere far below. "It's in the ventilation system," Chief Mortalk reported, checking his scanners. "The beast is using the air ducts to move through the station." Felix was still staring at the air vent, his small body rigid with attention. Jake realized that his cat had detected the Fangbeast's presence before any of the sophisticated alien sensors. "How is that possible?" Commander Yixali asked. "The vents are too small for a creature that size." "Fangbeasts can compress their bodies," Chief Mortalk replied grimly. "They're ambush predators. They use confined spaces to their advantage." More reports came in over the communication system. Security teams throughout the station reported strange sounds in the walls. Several aliens claimed to have seen massive claws scraping against metal surfaces. The beast was moving through the station's infrastructure like a deadly ghost. Jake picked up Felix, who continued to track something invisible to everyone else. The cat's head turned slowly, following a path through the air that only he could sense. "Where is it going?" Jake asked quietly. Felix's green eyes fixed on a maintenance hatch near the floor. His nose twitched, processing information that human senses couldn't detect. Commander Hextar was organizing hunting parties. "Teams of 8, he commanded. "Plasma rifles set to maximum power. Spread out through levels 4 through 7. Drive the beast toward the outer hull." "Wait," Jake said. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" The aliens turned to look at him, with expressions ranging from annoyance to outright hostility. "Human!" Hextar snarled. "This is no time for your species' weakness. We face a true predator, not some domesticated pet." "That's exactly my point," Jake replied. "You're thinking like soldiers. This thing is a hunter. It won't fight you directly unless it has to. Trade Minister Velnara looked skeptical. Then, what do you suggest, Captain? Jake looked down at Felix, who was still tracking the invisible scent trail. Hunters understand other hunters. Maybe we should think like prey instead of predators. The suggestion was met with scoffs and dismissive laughter. Chief Mortock's scarred face twisted with contempt. The human wants us to act like prey, he said, to his soldiers. This is why their species brings useless pets to dangerous places. They do not understand strength. But Jake noticed that Felix's behavior was changing. The cat's tension was increasing, and he kept looking toward the lower levels of the station. Whatever Felix was sensing, it was getting stronger. The first attack came 20 minutes later. A security team on level 5 encountered the Fangbeast in a maintenance corridor. The team leader's last transmission was cut short by a roar that echoed through the entire station. When the backup teams arrived, they found 3 Varaxian warriors dead and 2 more paralyzed by the beast's toxin. The corridor walls were torn apart, showing claw marks that cut through reinforced metal like paper. "It's using the station's layout against us," Chief Mortock reported to the command center. "The narrow corridors prevent us from surrounding it, and our superior numbers become a disadvantage." Commander Hextar's armor plates rattled with frustration. "Then we flush it out, seal the lower levels, and use gas weapons. The station's life support systems are on the lower levels," Commander Yixali pointed out. "Gas weapons could poison the entire facility." Jake watched the tactical displays with growing concern. The alien security forces were using standard military tactics against a creature that had evolved to defeat exactly those kinds of approaches. Felix seemed to sense Jake's worry and rubbed against his leg, purring softly. "It's not going to work," Jake said quietly. "What did you say?" Hextar demanded. Jake looked around the command center at all the alien faces. "Your hunting parties, they're not going to work. The Fangbeast is smarter than you're giving it credit for." "And I suppose your tiny pet has a better strategy?" Velnara asked with obvious sarcasm. Jake looked down at Felix, who was now sitting calmly beside his feet. The cat's behavior had changed. The next few days on Kepler's Rest were difficult for Jake and his crew. Everywhere they went, aliens stared and pointed at Felix. The small cat walked beside Jake or rode on his shoulder, completely unbothered by all the attention. But the comments grew louder and more frequent. In the station's main cantina, Jake sat at a table with Lisa and 2 other crew members. Felix lay on the table beside Jake's food tray, his tail hanging over the edge. The cantina was huge, with tables and chairs sized for dozens of different alien species. The air smelled of strange foods and exotic drinks. At a nearby table, 3 Korvaxi merchants were talking loudly. They looked like giant crabs with too many eyes, and their voices made clicking sounds when they spoke. Jake could understand them through his translator device. "Look at the human's pet," one Korvaxi clicked. "It is so small that one of our younglings could step on it by accident." "I heard it does nothing but sleep and eat," another replied. "What use is such a creature on a starship?" The third Korvaxi made a sound like laughing. "Perhaps we should place bets on how long it will survive. I give it 3 days before something eats it." Felix's ears twitched toward the sound, but he continued washing his paw with his pink tongue. Jake reached over and scratched the cat's head. Felix purred and rubbed against Jake's hand. A group of Zephyrians slithered past their table. The largest, one, with scales that changed color from green to gold, stopped near Jake. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice full of false sweetness. "We have been discussing your interesting companion. We deal in exotic pets, you know. Perhaps we could take this burden off your hands?" Jake looked up at her. Felix isn't for sale. Not sale, the Zephyrian replied. We would provide him a safe home, away from the dangers of space travel. Surely you want what is best for such a delicate creature? Felix stopped, washing his paw, and looked directly at the Zephyrian. His green eyes were steady and calm. The alien stared back, and for a moment something strange passed between them. The Zephyrian's scales rippled, and she took a small step backward. He's fine where he is, Jake said firmly. The Zephyrian's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. As you wish, she said, but her voice had changed. She slithered away quickly, glancing back at Felix once before disappearing into the crowd. That was weird, Lisa said. Did you see how she reacted to Felix? Jake nodded. He had noticed it too. Felix had that effect sometimes. Most people saw a cute, harmless cat. But occasionally, someone would look deeper and see something else, something that made them step back. The worst mockery came during the trade negotiations. Jake needed to buy quantum crystals for his ship's engines. The meeting was held in a large conference room with representatives from 6 different alien species. Felix sat on the floor beside Jake's chair, quietly observing the room. Trade Minister Velnara led the meeting. She was professional and polite, but Jake could see the doubt in her pale blue eyes. Captain Morrison, she said, we have prepared a generous offer for the quantum crystals you require. The negotiations went well at first. Jake was an experienced trader, and he knew how to deal with different alien cultures. But everything changed when Commander Hextar arrived late to the meeting. The massive Vraxian warrior stomped into the room, his black armor clanking with each step. He looked around the table at all the alien representatives, then his dark eyes fell on Felix. The human still brings his pet to important meetings, Hextar said, his voice like grinding metal. How can we take him seriously when he shows such poor judgment? The other aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few nodded in agreement. Jake felt the mood in the room change. Felix doesn't interfere with business, Jake said calmly. Does he not? Hextar replied. Captain Morrison, your attachment to this useless creature calls your decision-making into question. If you cannot make practical choices about something so simple, how can we trust you with important trade agreements? Trade Minister Velnara looked troubled. Perhaps the commander has a point. Your emotional attachment to this animal might affect your judgment in other areas. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. My judgment has kept my crew alive for 10 years. Felix has been part of that success. How? Hextar demanded. What can this tiny creature possibly contribute to space travel? Can it pilot a ship, repair engines, fight enemies? Felix, who had been lying quietly on the floor, suddenly stood up. He walked to the center of the room and sat down, directly between Jake and Commander Hextar. The cat looked up at the 9-foot-tall alien warrior without fear. Hextar stared down at Felix. You see, it knows nothing of respect or proper behavior. It should cower before a Vraxian warrior. But Felix did not cower. Instead, he began to groom himself, as if the entire room full of powerful aliens was beneath his notice. This casual dismissal made Hextar even angrier. This proves my point, the commander growled. Humans lack proper understanding of hierarchy and strength. They treat insignificant creatures as equals. The trade negotiations continued, but the atmosphere remained tense. Jake managed to secure a deal for the quantum crystals, but the price was higher than he had hoped. He could tell that the aliens' doubts about his judgment had affected their willingness to offer fair terms. After the meeting, Jake and Felix walked through the station's commercial district. The corridors here were filled with shops and vendors, selling goods from across the galaxy. Aliens of all types browsed the stalls, looking for rare items and exotic foods. Felix trotted beside Jake, his small paws silent on the metal floor. Occasionally, he would stop to investigate an interesting smell or watch a particular alien. Jake noticed that his cat was particularly interested in the air vents and maintenance hatches they passed. They stopped at a weapons dealer's stall. The owner was a short, furry alien with 6 arms and large, dark eyes. He looked at Jake with curiosity. "Human!" the dealer chirped. "You need weapon, yes? Protection for dangerous travels?" Jake examined the energy pistols on display. They were well made and reasonably priced. As he haggled with the dealer, Felix wandered around the stall, sniffing at various items. The dealer noticed Felix and made a cooing sound. "Small earth creature, very cute, yes? But no good for protection. You need real weapon for real dangers." "He's not for protection," Jake replied. "He's my companion." The dealer's large eyes blinked rapidly. "Companion? But why choose something so weak? Galaxy full of strong creatures. Why not choose Alterian Warhound or Vraxian Battle Beetle?" Jake selected an energy pistol and paid for it. "Because Felix chose me first." As they left the stall, Jake heard the dealer talking to another customer about the strange human who keeps useless pet. The words followed them down the corridor. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters, reading reports on his datapad. Felix was curled up on his lap, purring softly. The cat's weight was warm and comforting after a day of alien mockery. Lisa knocked on the door and entered. "Captain, I've been hearing more talk about Felix. Some of the aliens are getting pretty cruel about it." Jake stroked Felix's soft fur. "What kind of talk?" A group of Korvaxi were joking about accidentally stepping on him. Some Zephyrian suggested he would make a good snack, and Commander Hexitar has been telling everyone that humans are too soft for deep space, because we form attachments to inferior creatures. Felix's purring grew louder, as if he was trying to comfort Jake. The cat's green eyes were half closed, but Jake could tell he was still alert and listening. "They don't understand," Jake said. "They see weakness where there's actually strength." "What do you mean?" Jake scratched Felix under the chin. "Felix has been with me through battles with space pirates, emergency landings on hostile planets, and equipment failures that should have killed us all. He's never panicked, never gotten in the way, and never failed to pull his weight." Lisa looked skeptical. "How does a cat pull his weight on a starship?" Jake smiled. "You'd be surprised. Felix has found gas leaks that our sensors missed. He's detected intruders before our security systems. He's even warned us about mechanical problems by acting strangely before the alarms went off." As if to prove Jake's point, Felix suddenly raised his head and looked toward the air vent near the ceiling. His pupils dilated and his body became tense. He stared at the vent for several seconds, then relaxed and resumed purring. "See?" Jake said. "He hears things we don't, senses things we miss. The aliens think he's useless because they only see his size. They don't understand that the best tools aren't always the biggest or strongest." Later that night, Jake walked through the station's corridors with Felix at his side. The lighting was dimmed for the station's sleep cycle and fewer aliens were moving around. Jake wanted to explore more of the massive structure and get a better sense of its layout. Felix seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go. The cat led Jake through a series of maintenance corridors and service passages. They climbed through access tunnels and explored areas that most visitors never saw. Felix moved with confidence, as if he was mapping every inch of the station. In one of the lower levels, they encountered a group of Vraxian security guards. The warriors were surprised to see a human and his cat in the restricted area. "What are you doing here?" the lead guard demanded. "Just exploring." The ship Horizon's Edge moved slowly toward the huge space station. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched the metal structure grow larger on the screen. The station was massive, bigger than any city he had seen on Earth. It spun slowly in the darkness of space, with thousands of lights blinking across its surface. "Kepler's Rest," Jake said to his crew, "one of the biggest trading posts in this part of the galaxy." Behind him, a small orange cat walked across the bridge floor. The cat's name was Felix, and he had been Jake's companion for 3 years. Felix was not big or scary. He weighed only 8 pounds and had soft fur and bright green eyes. Most people would call him cute. The ship docked with a loud clang of metal. Jake picked up Felix and placed him on his shoulder. The cat balanced, easily, as he had done many times before. Together they walked toward the airlock where the rest of the crew waited. "Captain," said Lisa Carter, the ship's engineer, "are you sure about bringing Felix to the station? Some of those aliens might not understand about cats." Jake scratched Felix under the chin. The cat purred loudly. "Felix goes where I go. He's part of this crew." The airlock opened with a hiss. Jake stepped into the station with Felix still on his shoulder. The air was different here, thick with the smell of metal and strange spices. The sounds were different, too. Instead of human voices, Jake heard clicks, growls, and other noises he could not identify. The main corridor was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that Jake could barely see it. Alien beings of all shapes and sizes moved through the space. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others crawled on many legs or slithered across the floor. A group of tall, armored creatures approached Jake and his crew. These were Vraxians, Jake knew from his studies. They stood 9 feet tall and looked like giant insects made of metal. Their leader stepped forward. His armor was black with silver markings. "I am Commander Hextar," the alien said. His voice sounded like grinding metal. "Welcome to Kepler's Rest, humans." Jake nodded politely. "Thank you, Commander. I'm Captain Jake Morrison." Hextar looked at Felix, who was still sitting on Jake's shoulder. The alien's eyes were like black glass, and they stared at the small cat for a long moment. Then Hextar made a sound that might have been laughter. "What is this tiny creature?" Hextar asked. "Is it your food?" "This is Felix," Jake replied. "He's my companion." More Vraxians gathered around them. They all stared at Felix and made the same grinding laugh sound. Felix looked back at them with calm green eyes. His tail swished once, but he did not seem afraid. "Your companion," Hextar repeated. "This small thing? Human, do you not know the dangers of space? There are creatures in the dark between stars that could swallow this tiny beast without noticing." Jake kept his voice steady. "Felix has been with me on many dangerous missions. He's earned his place on my ship." The Vraxians laughed louder now. Other aliens in the corridor stopped to see what was happening. Soon a crowd had formed around the humans. Jake saw Zephyrians who looked like giant snakes with arms. He saw Alterians who were tall and thin with pale blue skin. All of them stared at Felix. A Zephyrian slithered closer. Her scales were purple and green, and they caught the station's lights as she moved. "Such a tiny thing," she said. Her voice was soft but had a hissing quality. "How does it survive in the cold of space?" "He does fine," Jake said. The Zephyrian's eyes were large and yellow. She looked at Felix like he was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. "What purpose does it serve? Can it fight? Can it work, machiness?" "He keeps me company," Jake answered. "And he's good at finding things." This made the aliens laugh even more. The sound filled the huge corridor. Felix's ears twitched, but he remained calm on Jake's shoulder. He looked around at all the alien faces with curiosity rather than fear. An Alterian walked up to the group. She was tall and elegant, with long white hair and silver robes. "I am Trade Minister Velnara," she said. Her voice was musical and pleasant. "Captain Morrison, we have prepared quarters for you and your crew." "Thank you," Jake said. Velnara glanced at Felix. "The station has rules about animals. They must be contained in proper quarters." "Felix isn't just an animal," Jake replied. "He's a member of my crew." The trade minister's eyebrows rose. "A crew member? Captain, surely you understand that only intelligent beings can serve on starship crews." Jake looked down at Felix. The cat was watching a group of small aliens that looked like walking rocks. Felix's pupils had grown wide, and his body was very still. Jake recognized this pose. Felix was hunting something, even if it was just with his eyes. "Intelligence comes in many forms," Jake said. Commander Hextar stepped closer. He was so tall that Jake had to look up to see his face. "Human, you amuse us with your attachment to this helpless creature. But Kepler's Rest is not a safe place for pets. Perhaps you should reconsider bringing such weakness into dangerous territory." The crowd of aliens murmured agreement. Jake heard words in different languages, but the tone was the same everywhere. They thought Felix was weak. They thought Jake was foolish for bringing him. Jake reached up and scratched Felix behind the ears. The cat purred and rubbed his head against Jake's hand. "We'll be fine," Jake said to the crowd. "Felix and I have been through worse than this." "Worse than this?" the Zephyrian asked. "Have you faced the beasts that hunt in the outer ringses? Have you seen what lurks in the lower dexes of this Stastion?" "We've faced pirates, space storms, and planet killers," Jake replied. "A space station doesn't scare us." The aliens exchanged looks. Some seemed impressed that humans had survived such dangers. Others looked even more confused about why Jake would risk bringing Felix to such places. Trade Minister Velnara smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Perhaps we can discuss your companion later. For now, let us show you to your quarters. The welcome ceremony begins in 2 hours." The crowd began to break up, but Jake could hear the aliens talking among themselves as they walked away. He caught words in Universal Standard: tiny, weak, foolish humans. Felix seemed to hear them too. His ears turned toward the voices, and his green eyes followed the aliens as they moved through the corridor. Lisa Carter walked up beside Jake. "Captain, maybe we should leave Felix on the ship." Jake shook his head. "Felix stays with me. These aliens need to learn that humans do things differently." As they walked toward their quarters, Jake noticed that Felix was paying close attention to everything around them. The cat's head turned toward air vents, side passages, and maintenance doors. It was like Felix was making a map in his mind. The quarters were large and comfortable, with beds for the crew and a small area with Earth-style furniture. Jake set Felix down on the floor, and the cat immediately began exploring. He sniffed. Corners investigated the air circulation system and tested the softness of the chairs. "At least he's not bothered by all those aliens staring at him," Lisa said. Jake watched Felix jump onto a table and look out the window at the station's busy docking bays. Felix doesn't worry about what others think. He just focuses on what's important. Outside their quarters, Jake could still hear alien voices talking about the human's tiny pet. But Felix seemed completely unconcerned. He settled down in a patch of artificial sunlight from the room's lighting system and began to clean his fur. Jake smiled. The aliens would learn soon enough that appearances could be deceiving. Felix had surprised bigger and more dangerous opponents before. Something told Jake that this station was about to get a lesson in never underestimating Earth's creatures, no matter how small they might seem.